Well, we're going to turn now to another critical component of national innovation systems, namely national laboratories. And I have to say, starting out, that this is our first panel of the day that has more women than men. So, Mark, you're kind of a minority here.
Very brave.
So I'll start with a few overarching comments. The U.S. National Laboratory System really predates World War II. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, our oldest national lab that does measurements and standards, goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. But it was really World War II and the Manhattan Project that started, the creation of our national laboratory system. And I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Oppenheimer, but I strongly recommend it for many reasons. But the filming and the whole history of Los Alamos and its collaboration with the University of Chicago and University of California is really captured beautifully there. And I got to go to the pre-screening of it with the Secretary of Energy, and in the front there were about 2 rows of very ancient old men. And they were still alive from the Manhattan Project there. So it was really incredible. But in any event, our national laboratory system in the United States is really one of our crown jewels. And it's unique, it's world class. And just to give you an idea of the scale, I'll talk about the Department of Energy labs, and Kate Evans represents Oak Ridge. But, about $8 billion goes into the Office of Science labs. And then we have our 3 national security labs, Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, Sandia. Their budgets are now approaching $26 billion a year. Now, this all relates to, the nuclear weapons, science-based stockpile stewardship. But those labs and the Department of Energy labs have had a tremendous impact on not just basic science and knowledge, but in developing technologies and production systems. People don't know this little fact, that the whole Human Genome Project emerged out of work that was done at Los Alamos to study the human effects of radiation. So it's an incredible system. And from the very beginning, they work with industry. Always industry, academia has been part of the National Lab system to solve these big, complex issues. Talking about technology commercialization, and we're going to get into that, it was really in the late 80s in the Reagan administration, and I'm proud to say I played a role in this, that we changed our federal legislation to allow the national labs to have what are called CRADAs, Cooperative Research and Development Agreements with private companies. This was through bipartisan legislation, the Stevenson-Weidler Act, and it also enabled researchers at labs to hold title and get royalties from inventions. And that has unleashed a huge generation also of large-scale partnerships, but companies that have emerged out of the national labs. So let's turn to our great panel discussion. And of course, CSIRO is the Australian equivalent of that, and has many facilities throughout the country. We have Dr. Kate Evans, who is the Director of Institutional Strategic Planning at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and I know you'll tell us a little bit about Oak Ridge. We don't have a keynote today on quantum computing, but if we did, Dr. Kate Evans gives one of the best talks I've ever heard, so your leadership's tremendous. On the Australian side, Ms. Anna Marie Arabia, OAM. You are the Chief Executive of the Australian Academy of Sciences, and that's, again, bringing together so many of these institutional capabilities. And Dr. Mark Peters, the President and CEO of MITRE. But Mark, of course, you started your career. I first knew you when you were at Los Alamos. Then you were a leader at Argonne. Then you were the director of the Idaho National Engineering Lab. Then you were the Executive Vice President of Battelle, overseeing all the labs. And now you are the President of MITRE. So you really, I think probably of everybody here in the room and probably throughout the U.S. know the most about the National Lab system. So,
I've moved too much. Yeah.
Well, so let's just start with each of you telling a little bit about, your respective organizations and get into this, discussion about the interstitial collaboration between the national labs, industry, and academia, and what that means for delivering your mission but also commercializing the new knowledge and technologies at scale. And we'll sort of break that down as we go forward. But we'll start with you, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks, Deborah, and thanks, Charles, for the opportunity. And thanks to the nation of Australia for being a fantastic host. It's been a wonderful trip, and can't beat this. So as Deborah noted, I've been around a little bit in the system. Maybe just briefly about MITRE. So in the United States, there's 42 what we call federally funded research and development centers, 17 of which energy labs that Kate will talk about in more detail. We operate 6 of the other federally funded research and development centers for the nation. So everything spanning from national security to defense intelligence, as well as health, aviation, critical infrastructure, cyber, et cetera. A lot in AI and quantum as well. Point being that we were at CSIRO the other day, and to Deborah's point, this whole notion of a sort of innovation pipeline from, I take Suresh's point that we shouldn't be stovepiping between basic all the way out to a product, but sort of the labs and the FFRDCs in the US, much like CSIRO, sort of sit in this area where we do basic science. We also do a lot of applied science, as do the universities. But primarily, we're all about big mission outcomes, sort of top-down big mission outcomes. So the partnership with the research universities is vital in terms of the collaboration, the research collaboration, but also the importance of the workforce that comes to work at our institutions. But then also, as Deborah noted, continuing to try to push ourselves to be more and more relevant to industry through the processes that Deborah alluded to. And importantly, I think it's always a work in progress for us. How do we continue to challenge ourselves to move at the pace of the private sector? Particularly in these times, I think it's even more important. You heard earlier about the fact that the federal investment in the United States in R&D is sort of flat, if not declining, whereas private sector R&D investments are actually going up. And so the ability of the labs and the universities to work effectively within an ecosystem is key. There's a lot of similarities between places like CSIRO and ANSTO here in Australia and what the national labs and the FFRDCs represent in the US. There's differences, but there's also a lot of similarities and already a lot of partnerships and collaborations that we knew about and heard more about this week. So very excited about the future potential.
Mark, let me follow up on one comment you've made about the FFRDCs and MITRE in particular. You sit at this fulcrum, very interesting fulcrum. How do you deal with the issue that you're, quote, competing with industry, and the things that you do should really just be done in the private sector? Yeah,
the first thing I'll say is by law, we're not allowed to compete with industry, right? But does that stop us sometimes? Not necessarily. So we need to be very thoughtful about that, but we're really about pre-competitive. And that's our role, much like the universities are about pre-competitive. But it's really a unique set of S&T capabilities and also big facilities. And I'll let Kate talk a lot more about big facilities because that's what her lab's all about. But it really does sort of fit in this really important, I'll call it niche. But if we start to compete with industry, we're outside of our box, is the bottom line. And so, but I would say all of us always have to check ourselves on that. That's a really important point.
And you also have very sophisticated intellectual property management systems to deal with this too.
We do. And we're not in the business. Our royalties, we don't make a lot of money off our royalties. Candidly, for MITRE, the vast majority of our IP is provided. It's government furnished, so we provide it to another company for free. So that's not the business we're in. We're in the business of public good and impact. So we're nonprofit. Like most of the FFRDCs, as you know, Deborah, for the audience's general benefit, are primarily operated by nonprofits, universities, or places like MITRE or Battelle that are in it for the impact, not for the financial benefit.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. These laboratories are owned by the government for the most part, but operated by contractors, universities, consortiums, and for instance, Sandia, that Suresh serves on the board for many years, was operated by Lockheed Martin and then a consortium now as well. Well, let me turn to you, Anne-Marie, and tell us a little bit about the Australian Academy of Science and then, how you see this role of the national laboratories, CSIRO, universities, industry in the innovation imperative for future of Australia.
Thank you, Deborah. It's such a pleasure to be here. Could I start just by commenting on how beautiful Gadigal country is? We are very, very lucky here. But to say our history is shared, the Manhattan Project obviously was important for the world, but Sir Mark Oliphant, who was an Australian who did all of his research in the UK, was very much involved in that. Did not appear significantly in Oppenheimer, should have, but we'll speak to the producer. But he returned to Australia after World War II, established the Australian University and was the first president of the Australian Academy of Science. And it was really after World War II that our research effort blossomed similarly, as you described. And institutions like CSIRO and our other publicly funded research agencies have grown since then. The Australian Academy of Science isn't a research organisation, that is, we don't undertake the research, but our fellows are elected to the Academy because of their distinguished record in science in Australia. They're elected by their peers, so it's not something you can become a member of course, and our sister academy is the National Academy of Science, Engineering and Medicine in Washington. We bring together those distinguished scientists and they work across the research ecosystem, including in publicly funded research agencies, in universities, in industry. And so we play more of a convening role, and one that allows us to gather the expertise that they hold and translate that for use by decision makers in government and in other places. But we also therefore have a bit of a bird's eye view on the research ecosystem in Australia. And whilst the national laboratories of the US are larger in scale, there are similarities, as you've mentioned, with CSIRO, ANSTO and some of the other publicly funded research agencies in terms of being very active collaborators with industry. CSIRO undertakes many projects with industry, but also works in basic science, in discovery science, and partners with universities and other parts of the research ecosystem in Australia. Similarly, it's at that pre-competitive stage usually, unless there is a particular contract that would enable a different form of engagement. But it is an ecosystem that works, of course, can always be improved. And in Australia, we work hard, I think, to improve collaboration between research organisations and industry with limited success, I would say. I think there is more that we can do there, and there are models around the world that we could all draw on to improve that. But I think the key point I'd like to make is that we really do need an ecosystem approach. There is never a solution that goes to just more funding in one research agency or more funding to stimulate early stage financing or incentives solely for industry. We do need to look at the system far more comprehensively and in a strategic way to enable it to hum in the way that we need it to, particularly today where we live in a technologically advanced world, where we live in a world where we are competing for talent across the country, across the world, and in a world that's increasingly volatile. So partnerships are important. The US partnership with Australia in research is phenomenal. It is our strongest research partner, one that we should always nurture. The underlying principles of our research partnership are similar and strong, and we should always seek to strengthen those. I've got some interesting stats on how much we collaborate, but maybe we can come back to that later. But I did want to give that broader ecosystem overview and the Academy's role in that. Thank you.
May I ask you, do you also play a role at the bequest of the government, both federally and regionally, to do special studies and analysis where you bring this tremendous brain trust together?
Yes. So in Australia, there are 5 learned academies. We're the Australian Academy of Science. I've got sister academy representatives today from the Academy of Technology and Engineering in the room, so it's lovely to see them. But we work collectively and bring together multidisciplinary advice, sometimes at the request of government, so where particular reports are commissioned of us and are fed into government at cabinet level. We played a very significant role during the pandemic in providing very up-to-date advice to government to help them navigate that that crisis. And sometimes we develop those reports ourselves proactively.
Because that's certainly a role our national academies of science and engineering and medicine play, and many in the U.S. delegation have served on those studies, and it's a serious piece of work. And one thing I have to say that I'm very proud of, they do a superb job of balancing the expertise and the viewpoints, so you get the total diversity of issues when you're doing a study.
That's exactly what we do, and it is a delicate balance. And to provide enough certainty for decision making, often in a sea of uncertainty. So to be able to provide evidence that is presented in a way that's understandable and that can guide decision making without necessarily having recommendations, but to enable government to consider other factors so that they can ultimately arrive at decisions that are within the national interest.
Great. So, Kate, I'm going to start with the comment about Oak Ridge, and then you can tell a little bit more about it. But, you know, Oak Ridge, as well as other labs, has played a huge role in the United States in developing our global leadership in high-performance computing, supercomputing, advanced computing, quantum, AI, et cetera, coming out of the reality that we didn't do physical testing of our weapon systems, so we had to get into modeling and simulation. And that's another incredible partnership between the science, the mission, and creating the whole industry. I mean, if it weren't for the national labs, we wouldn't have a supercomputer industry, because you really were the ones who made it happen. But tell us a little bit about Oak Ridge. You're one of the oldest labs in Tennessee, and graded materials. You were leaders in additive manufacturing. You've got the neutrons. I mean, you've got everything there, including beautiful nature.
Thank you. Yes, we have a lot of that, although I think I'm in strong competition here. So first of all, thank you so much for hosting us. This is quite a group to be with. Yes, the national labs are a very unique treasure that I didn't really appreciate even when I was in graduate school. I wasn't as aware of their existence. They do tend to keep the secret. But I think one important thing is that they stand ready for challenges that happen. Of course, the Manhattan Project was a national challenge. We needed to come together. That's what started it. But along the way, other challenges have popped up, and the national labs stand ready. I like to think of us as sort of firefighters ready when the fires come. I can worry about that. When something pops up, for example, when COVID hit, rather than do our typical research, they said, hey, can you use your supercomputer to do simulations on aerosols and masks and things like that, and comorbidities, and doing lots of different kinds of health research. But along the way, one example I can give back when I did science, was looking when there was a big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. It was released, still called the Gulf of Mexico then.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It was called that at the time. Let's just move on.
That's on the recording. Maybe we'll have to delete it.
This is the last panel. I'm going to be a little provocative. At the time, when the oil spill happened, it was released into the Gulf, and they said, hey, could your climate and ocean models be used to figure out where that oil will go? So we took our climate models, which have an ocean dynamics model in them, and ran them out forward and showed them where that oil spill would go. Because we're ready and we have that large capability. We were able to take our flagship Earth system model and run it to solve a national challenge. For example, one example I'll give with my current job doing strategic planning, I get to, this is, by the way, one secret treasure of the national labs, is that a small percentage of every dollar that comes in gets set aside for seed money investments. So the future, something that even industry isn't even thinking about, something that we want to develop because we think it might be a great idea for the future. With those funds, we realized that we had this great manufacturing capability at the lab, but it was very much on the R&D side, and a lot of industries could benefit from 3D printing and large-scale types of manufacturing. And so we invested our internal seed money resources on the translational side, and that's what has become what we call the manufacturing demonstration facility, now over $100 million to actually translate manufacturing to industry. That's something that was used with internal lab funds. A very small example I want to give you, because I think this is better than me just giving you the brochure about the labs. We also bring in new staff with internal investments, staff in new areas to develop new technologies. we brought in a researcher, a young researcher who was just out of his degree, and he was looking at using CRISPR for gene editing for bioenergy applications, and it failed. He said, look, I know you gave me this 2 years of funding. It didn't work out the way I wanted, but this was interesting, and I think maybe we should go back to this technique we used in the 70s, but take this computational aspect of it. And we said, if you've learned from that failure and you think you have a success, so we gave him more money, we doubled down, and that became the success. In other words, that internal investment failed, but that became the bedrock for a new idea that has now paid off. And that investment in him, I wish I could take credit. That was before I took the job, but I can talk about it. That's part of my job too, is to take the success of my predecessor and sell it. And talk about, even at the small scale, these little things can become big things, and the labs are designed to take those small ideas to something that then gets picked up by industry. As Mark says, we don't play in their space, but we can help do things they can't invest in at the stage they are, at the very small scale or at the big scale, like our facilities. We have large-scale accelerators, which does research you can't do anywhere else in the world, to build medical isotopes on all parts of the periodic table, as you can imagine. And of course, yes, the supercomputer. I'm not allowed to be on a panel without saying we have the second largest supercomputer in the world. But anyway, the national labs, and of course we have number 1 and number 2 with DOE, but that's breaking the boundaries so that now industry can take what we've done on those big computers and build their own. They can now match that at much lower cost and take the successes and the failures we've had to move forward. So that's a sort of set of vignettes, and I hope that helps color the kind of things that we do.
And who has the world's first now supercomputer? Lawrence Livermore?
Yes, they have number 1. We're very proud
You
of them.
see how competitive they are. She didn't want to mention.
But they built the same system we did with our help,
I know.
and we're all happy about that.
Yeah, we are.
Like
So,
100 supercomputer, please.
yeah. We always like to say at the council, because we played such a role in making the business case for industry using these, to out-compete is to out-compute. So let me ask you another question about, or comment about Oak Ridge. In addition, to your leadership in advanced manufacturing and materials and supercomputing and now quantum, how are you dealing with the issue of attracting the next generation of talent to come and work in the facility? I mean, you are in a kind of isolated place between Knoxville, and I've been there many times, so I know how long it takes to get to Oak Ridge. But is that a challenge, or do you still have young people that are ready to come because of the problems you're working on?
It's a constant challenge. You all heard on the higher educational panel this morning that we need more folks. It seems the bottleneck is at the PhD level in many ways. Yes, Mark, I was joking with, recently hired away one of my quantum experts over to MITRE. I think that was before you became CEO, so I won't blame you for that one. But we do sometimes beg, borrow, steal, but really the best thing we can do is interest students in what we're doing and get them at an early enough level that they will want to learn and study this and be passionate about the service. So national labs are a service to the nation, and so if we can get them interested in the mission, the applications of these being for the good of mankind and societies, then we've got them. Now, the other thing is, if they go off to industry, when I was in computing, I lost people to NVIDIA all day long making twice my salary as the division director. And that's a success story to me. So if we're training them and they're going to industry, I'm okay with that, as long as the universities feed me some more students.
Well, I played a role myself, because when I was on the board for a number of years of NASDAQ and OMX, they had a very early cyber breach, which was public, but I did get them somebody from Livermore that I knew, and Livermore was very mad at me when NASDAQ hired that person. But it's part of building the talent in the country. And I have to comment, Suresh, you have an interesting fusion now of national laboratory expertise with the university, because your senior vice president for research, Tomas Diaz de la Rubia, who helped create the National Ignition Facility in Fusion, he's bringing this LDRD investment model that Kate talked about to your university in your Ideas Challenge. So that's a wonderful example of this cauldron of creativity. Mark, I do want to ask you to comment on your tenure at Argonne in a leadership role, and also then as director of the Idaho National Laboratory in the whole nuclear infrastructure of the country and the world, and kind of just wherever you want to go on that, because both Argonne and Idaho really led to the development and commercialization of our nuclear industry at scale, but all around the world as well.
Yeah, so coming out of the Manhattan Project in 1949, there was a place out in Idaho, big tract of land that became federal land, that became the National Reactor Testing Station. And so actually the precursor to Idaho National Lab and Argonne, we called it Argonne West back in the day, as you would remember, Deborah, as opposed to the campus in Chicago. That's where 52 reactors were designed, built, and tested. They were really the backbone for the civil nuclear sector across the globe, which is kind of pretty amazing. So we built 52. The cool thing is they're now about to build number 53, so we're back in the game. I'll come back to that. So that was sort of that was a public-private partnership, right? That was the government putting resources in, and then the Westinghouses and the GEs coming in and commercializing those machines. Not to mention the parallel path that became the nuclear navy, which is relevant, of course, to AUKUS Pillar 1 and all the things that are going on between the U.S. and Australia and the U.K. But it was the beginning of the civil nuclear sector, which, as an aside, is really important. If you're thinking about building nuke subs, you need a civil nuke sector that goes along with that to provide the expertise and the capability.
That's a very important point.
Yeah.
So just say that again.
Yeah. So if you're gonna, yeah, I mean, if you think about developing the workforce that's going to be able to design, construct, and operate nuclear submarines, you have to have that in companion with the civil nuclear sector. That to me, that's a requirement. You need to get there eventually. I realize Australia's on a path there, but I mean, that's proven for the United States. Yes, we're a weapons state, so it also fits in with nuclear weapons, but people like me who are in the nuclear space, as you noted, we can go from weapons over to civil nuke and sort of back and forth. It's a common set of expertise. But anyway, so back to, what Idaho and Argonne and Oak Ridge and other laboratories have done is now we're looking at really, truly, I think, a revitalization of nuclear in the United States. We built a lot of plants. We haven't built plants since the 80s in the United States. But we're back with really innovative, small and very small designs, particularly with the demand that's now coming from data centers and AI. I think it's a really exciting time for nuclear in the United States. And the labs play an important role because we do the science and the technology development, and then partner with industry, and industry goes off and gets those machines licensed and built. But we're with in the fission space. Suresh mentioned fusion earlier. I agree with his assessment. It's coming, but advanced fission in the United States, we're going to be moving dirt in the next couple of years. So that's very exciting, and I think and it fits back in. I'll let Kate can comment on climate change, but nuclear fission in the United States has really become a bipartisan, really almost a nonpartisan discussion, I would say, because of this nexus of national security, energy security, and climate, and mitigating climate change. So it's an exciting time. The resources going into R&D all the way out to commercialization, and how the federal government's working with the private sector is, I think, a great model.
But I know you shared this at our dinner in Canberra, but others here that were not with us should hear this story because you played a role, as did others. But just share what happened when this nuclear industry was politicized and we had kind of the shutdown of our nuclear enterprise in the Clinton administration, and what that meant and how you kept the knowledge alive.
Yeah, in the 90s, after a series of, you had 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and in the U.S., price of natural gas was such that it was really pushing nuclear out of the energy markets, and so we were sort of in a going out of business sale in the United States, and so they actually cut the Clinton administration stopped all the test reactor programs that included the Argonne West programs, and actually cut the nuclear R&D program nearly to zero. And the laboratories were actually the ones that came together through this internal investment, and we actually kept sort of this core R&D alive through our internal investment for a good couple, 2, 3, 4 years. And then over time, it started to get built back. The Bush administration came in and started to build it back. And that just since 2000 up until now, it's now up to nearly $2 billion US in just the R&D investment. And then you've got huge amount of private capital going into the nuclear space as well. So it's a different world, but I give the laboratories tremendous credit. I was a young scientist at the time, and benefited from that and learned a lot. But I marvel at the fact that these people had the courage to continue those programs.
So somebody should write the history on that someday.
So it's up here. We'll see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anna Maria, how are you dealing in the Australian Academy of Sciences in making these strategic priorities for the country in a way that you build the consensus as opposed to it being polarized? I mean, we even have, whether it's AI or genetics now, CRISPR-Cas9, there are groups, that are very active in saying we shouldn't do this, let's shut down the knowledge. How do you deal with that in Australia? Because we have to build the consensus to move forward in these areas. It can't be seen as either, in your case, Labor or Liberal, or our case, Republicans or Democrats.
It's always a contested space. I mean, there's obviously grey areas in the scientific evidence base, but perhaps more damaging is the political debates and some of the, often there's community sentiment around certain solutions and priorities. So firstly, we always take an evidence-informed approach, but one of the things we try to emphasise is the national interest. So as government goes about their national priorities, and they can change according to who's in government, we try to take a longer term view that the electoral cycle doesn't normally allow. So let me give you an example of a study that we have done recently that seeks to guide policy across government to help us address the national ambitions of the country as stated by our parliamentarians, but also the long-term economic environment and the forces on our economy that we know are there at the moment and are putting pressure on our country in the long term that will apply across different administrations. So in Australia, we have a report called the Intergenerational Report, which outlines those major forces on the economy. It speaks to ageing, demographic changes, the need to decarbonise, the need to improve productivity. So these are long-term challenges. When we seek to bring consensus and evidence to that argument, we take that right back to what science capability do we need in our country in order to meet those national ambitions as stated by government, and in order to ensure that we are resilient and able to look at those forces on the economy and address them. We've just recently completed an 18-month study on this, and when you strip back and have a look at science capability as it exists in terms of the degree to which we train individuals in the basic sciences, so starting at school right through to university, the influence of immigration in Australia, those that we lose, an ageing demographic. When you look at a range of different factors, mobility across the workforce, you're able to come up with a pretty clear picture of what we need to invest in today in order to have the national capability that we need tomorrow. And we'll be releasing this report in the next couple of months, but you wouldn't be surprised to know that the actions we take today around mathematical sciences, statistics, computer science, all of the underpinnings of supercomputing and other such things, genomics, are absolutely critical for us to be able to provide the healthcare that we need, to be able to boost innovation and productivity, to be able to keep our country secure in a volatile world. So we try and really articulate that pipeline from science capability right through to the policy response that's needed in our immigration department, in our science department, in our treasury, in our health department, because the impacts are cross-portfolio and they are long-term. So in some ways, that assists us in inoculating against some of that short-term thinking, some of the contested ideas and controversies that can arise in any one particular area, and with the changes that you see with changes in administration.
Well, we will look forward to seeing that report, and I'm sure we can map it from what we're doing in the U.S. and see where that intersection is, and will be another roadmap for our collaboration.
Absolutely. And if I could add just one other point, research infrastructure. I know you've spoken about it so articulately. Compute power is absolutely critical, right? And in Australia, we look forward to future investment in exascale computing. We don't have the sort of capabilities. I read all of the National Laboratory announcements, and I'm a little envious, I've got to say, when I read about the capability.
We're hiring.
But we have been working with government to make the case around not just public use of supercomputers, but industry use, and the opportunity that that provides Australia to grow our industrial base and our economy. And we point to examples such as yours. What's really important is that the cost of this sort of infrastructure can no longer be borne by government alone. It requires partnerships, at least in Australia. So some of the other evidence that we bring to decision making and that goes to enabling science capabilities goes to providing the enabling research infrastructure that's needed not just by the research sector but by industry as well. And when you can strip it back to those sort of enabling platforms, you neutralise the debate a little bit too.
So let's talk in the little last round we have here about these large-scale user facilities and how the national laboratories enable, scientists and engineers, but also industrial leaders to come and take advantage of these. And I know, Mark, you, of course, had the advanced photon source at Argonne, and others, you have neutron spallation in addition to computing. One little factoid that's great about the industrial use of high-performance computing in the United States, and we're very proud the U.S. Council on Competitiveness put together some of those first consortiums of companies coming to work at our supercomputers. How many in the room like Pringles potato chips? Charles, we're allowed to eat them still. Well, they're in, I certainly have to have a Pringle now and then. But does anybody want to guess why they have the shape they do and why they fit in that box and why they can manufacture them so fast? Like, in I Love Lucy, remember how the chocolates were coming off the machine? They went to two of the national labs, Procter & Gamble, who makes them, to study fluid flow dynamics, and because of being able to use a supercomputer, they figured out how to get those Pringles in the right shape and moving on the manufacturing process into the jar. That's a wonderful application. How much money do you think Procter & Gamble makes from selling Pringles around the world? Okay, that's one example. Back to user facilities, Mark and Kate.
Okay, first, actually, I'm glad to start because I wanted to follow up on something that you said. Although we were the first to build an exascale computer, I want to be clear, the next step in computing, you guys could really be leaders. One collaboration I'd like to highlight is that Oak Ridge has just received a Quantum Brilliance quantum computer from Australia. Thank you. This is a collaboration agreement. It's a small system, but this is wonderful that we are working together on this. And they're providing this to us. I'm sure there's some deep agreement that I'm not in the weeds on, but the idea is that we're both contributing to this. The idea is that we're going to hook it up to Frontier, our supercomputer, and figure out how to build the next generation supercomputer. It won't be the next system that we buy, it'll be the system after that. But we're already looking 2 steps ahead to say, how do you hook up a quantum computer to a traditional computer to get acceleration and solve new kinds of problems? And that kind of collaboration means you can leapfrog over what's already been done and be at the start of this. Working together, I think we can then define what the next big computing solutions will be. And then you get an even better Pringle.
We're going to send them all to Charles.
Yes. But I would, may I?
Yes.
So building on what Kate said, the model that the national labs have for these user facilities is important to note. They're called user facilities, and that's what they are. So if you've got a scientific problem that's interesting, you go through a peer review process, you get to use it. And they're perfect vehicles for collaboration internationally, and folks in Australia take advantage of those facilities all the time. Yeah. And even if industry comes in and they decide they want to protect their IP, it's a nominal cost recovery fee. So it's a beautiful example of how a U.S. capability can be used to drive collaboration. And that's, as you noted, Deborah, that's compute, that's light sources, that's neutron sources, that's test reactors, That's accelerators. I mean, it's big science kind of stuff and amazing things. And we have staff at the laboratories that are funded to support the users, and then they publish together. It's a beautiful model.
So I've been given the sign that our time is up, but we have one last go-around, and let's turn it to our strategic U.S.-Australia partnership. And I'd like to ask each of you if you had, well, you all have decision-making authority here, so this is an easy one. You do too, Kate.
Absolutely.
So, what project would you really like to undertake that would involve our national labs with universities and industries to do something big at scale between the U.S. and Australia? Not some little incremental thing, but a big, important thing that will deliver huge benefits to our nation and potentially globally. Mark.
Want me to start?
Yes.
I'm going to talk about one that hasn't come up. It's cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. That would be the one that I would bring up. I mean, it's a common challenge. The laboratories, the FFRDCs in the U.S. have tremendous capability. Critical infrastructure here in Australia and the U.S. is under attack. How do we defend it? And also, quite frankly, how do we attack others?
How would we do it quickly?
Oh, I think we've already got the capability. I think there's already government-to-government conversations. And there's already resources going on both sides. I think we just got to make the connections. And I started to see some of that already this week. Yeah.
Kate.
I think the future is not just one science area. So we have people working on climate, we have people working on materials, solar, nuclear, fusion, all these different science areas that we're all interested in. But if you can couple those science areas together, if you collect the data from one field, for example, weather prediction, and then you can actually use that towards flood modeling and then looking at infrastructure and floods, combining different kinds of things together to actually solve big challenges. It's not just one science area or one topic, it's us combining them together in a scientifically rigorous way. Industry and other users could take advantage of that opportunity to actually make good decisions and make good investments.
And I'll speak for Peter Dorrit and add precision agriculture and drought agriculture as one of the other areas. Anna Marie.
It's so not fair going third on this question. Both of those are so critically important. I can't help but just reiterate the sharing of data and the opportunity that brings across areas. How I couldn't emphasise the need to decarbonise as quickly as possible and to bring all resources and all nations to that challenge. I couldn't possibly choose anything else, but goodness, technological acceleration of technological capability for use in defence and other areas can't be secondary either. Unfair question, but if we can bring together data sources, I think many of those challenges can be accelerated.
And I'm going to share my idea that came out of our meeting with CSIRO and discussions, that we come together utilizing our respective national labs, our industry, our academia infrastructure to figure out how to process the rare earth and strategic minerals at scale. Not just find them, but to process them to get beyond the chokehold that China has on the strategic minerals and materials, and that includes uranium as well. Thank you for a wonderful discussion. Thank you, our leaders from the United States and our leader from Australia for this great discussion, and on to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.